When I get back from lunch, the CIO is standing in the server room with this puzzling look on her face, and I know it had to do with the network file system because she's been talking about it lately. And then she said this: "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Listen, I'm really concerned about the data on the on-premises NFS file server. It's not adequately backed up or protected from disaster. Now listen, the budget's tight, but I'd rather spend money on business over expensive backups, but we really need to get this fixed. So here's what I need you to do." She wanted me to come up with a solution that would ensure that data is protected in case of a disaster in the company's data center. It needed to be cost savings, easy to deploy and maintain, quickly migrate the existing data, and then also be able to replicate future data off-site with minimal interaction from support teams. I can do that. So I went back to my computer and found the white paper that I read on DataSync. It seemed like the perfect solution, so I tried it out. It worked, and I'm going to show you how right now. All right, so after doing some research and looking into the white paper for the data sync, I also looked at a white paper for storage gateway, and I think we have a solution. So first thing we got to do is a proof of concept. We got to make sure this works. And the reason I chose these services, basically, data sync satisfies a lot of the requirements. You can copy the existing data from the on-premise NFS system to the Amazon Simple Storage or S3, and that's pretty secure, redundant, and it's good storage. We can also transfer data up to 10 megabytes per second, so we could do it very quickly. And then obviously, budget being an issue, this is priced per gigabit of data moved, so it's very cost effective, and it can be deployed in minutes. So that's really why DataSync makes a lot of sense here. The only problem is that DataSync tasks are run manually, not automatically. So even though it's an ideal solution for transferring large amounts of data, AWS Storage Gateway file gateways provide an ongoing data transfer, and that can be to or from S3. So essentially, it's acting like a file system that's mounted on an S3 bucket. It's pretty much great, and it'll help us to replace the existing on-premise NFS file server, allowing us to simply retire the server altogether. And doing this is going to free up a lot of local resources, and it's going to reduce maintenance time. To conduct the proof of concept, we're going to provision some resources within AWS, and I want to take a second and show you the architecture that we're working with so you can better understand it. So we're going to start off with two Linux instances in separate subnets. One of them is going to be an instance that's acting as the on-premise client, and the other is going to be acting like the on-premise Linux NFS file server. So what we're going to do is deploy a DataSync agent instance into the same subnet as the on-premises NFS file server, and then configure it to copy some data to the S3 bucket. And then the last step to this is to deploy a file gateway appliance into the same subnet as the on-premise NFS file server, create an NFS file share on it, and then go ahead and reconfigure the Linux client to connect to the new share. So the first thing I'm going to do now is connect to the client instance, and I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to open up a terminal. So using my text editor to make this move a little faster, just to quickly change the permissions on the PEM file, and there we go, we're in this system. Now that we've successfully SSH'd into our Linux instance, we're going to go ahead and mount the on-premise NFS file share to the client instance. And we're going to do that using the server's private IP address. So we're going to sudo mount, use the private IP address of the server, and then we're going to finish the command /var/nfs and mount that to NFS. And to verify that it was successfully mounted, we'll just enter the df-h command, which really is just used to display all of the file systems that are on the disk, and then the h tag is used to make it in a very legible format for us. So you see we have it in megabytes versus 0000. And the client instance has two directories already set up. There just have a couple of photos, PNG files in there. The path for one is slash data slash data sync, and the other is slash data slash file gateway. We'll use them both later, but right now we're gonna go ahead and copy the contents of the slash data sync to our mount. And once we do that, we'll go ahead and start a new SSH session with the file server and just confirm that those files that we just copied are actually on the server. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is deploy and activate our AWS data sync gateway. So we're going to go into our EC2 instance, and we're actually going to launch a new instance. To do this, we'll just use one of the community AMIs. It's already set up, and we're going to search for that AMI. So right here on the left, we just click Community AMI, and then we'll search up the latest DataSync agent AMI here and select it. And then we'll choose our instance size. In this case, we'll just use a T2XL. And go to Configure. And this configuration is pretty important. You want to make sure it's in the correct subnet and that you have the correct VPC for this specific instance. Next, we need to choose a security group. We'll use one that's already existing and set up for this data sync. Notice that it has a port 80 open so that that file transfer can happen via the internet. And we'll just hit continue. And we'll just finish up with our configuration and launch the instance. It could take a couple minutes for it to actually populate, so just keep an eye out for that, but we will need the IP addresses for it. So once that's complete, I'll just go ahead and grab those IP addresses and just make a note of them. We'll be using them really shortly. Alright, so we have what we need. We can head over to the DataSync console, and once that opens up, we can get started, and we're going to create an agent. So we want to make sure we're in the right region, and then we want to go ahead and use the activation key. That's going to be the IP address that we just copied. And once this activation key is populated, we will see a signal from AWS saying that the agent was created. Next, we need to modify the on-prem NFS server configuration to allow connections from DataSync. So we'll SSH back into that and then go ahead and adjust that configuration. Then we'll be able to create a new DataSync task that will copy the data from the on-prem to the S3 bucket. So let's just set up our DataSync agent task by using the NFS server IP, and we'll use a mount path of /var/NFS. And what this is going to do for us is allow us to copy the data from the on-premises NFS server to our cloud storage. And for our cloud storage, we're going to use the Amazon S3 bucket. So we'll need to give this task the proper IAM role, and that will give it access to the S3 bucket. Now once the task has been created and made available, we can just simply hit this start button and start the task. Alright, so now that we started the task, we can just sit back for a couple of seconds while that task goes through, and then we'll be able to go into our S3 bucket and confirm that the task actually executed the way we wanted, and we should see the data that we copied earlier in our S3 bucket. So just hang out a second here, click open up the bucket, and voila, there's the data. So it's working. So we've been able to get the data from our NFS server onto our S3 bucket using a DataSync. And now what we need to do is go ahead and deploy a storage gateway so that we can make this task a non-manual task and it can happen automatically. So to set up our file gateway, we're going to need to launch a new instance and use the IP address of that instance for our gateway. So this is going to be our gateway appliance, and we're just going to configure it as we normally would with the right VPCs, right block storage, and the proper tags in order to identify it, give it the right security group, and then we'll go ahead and we'll launch that. Once the instance is ready, we'll go back and copy that IP address and take that over to our AWS storage gateway console and paste that in and get this gateway up and running. Great, so now our gateway is deployed and we're almost there. The next thing we need to do is just go ahead and create an NFS file share to attach to the Linux client. Now, of course, we want to limit access to this file share, so we're only going to allow access from within the client's subnet. And we'll do that by using the subnet mask /24, and we'll go ahead and create the file share. Once that's complete, we'll be able to see here there's a mount path that we can copy and actually use to mount this onto our instance and finally have this gateway all set up. Great, so let's go ahead and unmount that original connection that we set up for the on-premises NFS server, and then we'll mount this gateway in its place. And to confirm that we successfully mounted it, we'll use the df-h command again to make sure we're where we need to be. And also take a look and make sure that the photos that we copied earlier are actually here as well by using the ls command. Great, so now all we have to do is copy the second set of data from the second directory, and then we should have a fully qualified proof of concept, and that we can take back to the CIO, get budget approved, and get this project up and running, saving the company time, money, and resources. Now we're back here in our S3 bucket, and we should see 20 files here now, 10 from the first and 10 from the second. And look, they're all here. It means we have our gateway up and running, DataSync is doing its job, and they're working together perfectly to provide a great solution for moving on-premises data into the cloud seamlessly and effortlessly. So that seems to be a pretty good solution for our problem. The CIO is on board, we got the budget approved. It's time for my happy dance. I'm really glad you came to hang out with me in the cloud. This is D from dinthecloud.com, and I hope you learned something. I can't wait to do it again.